Everyone said Emily and Daniel were the perfect pair. At church picnics, family gatherings, or casual dinners with friends, they seemed inseparable, hands brushing, smiles exchanged, voices harmonizing when they told the same story from different angles. Emily often wondered if the world envied her, because what more could a woman want than a husband who was charming, intelligent, and attentive? But she knew the truth was less polished than the picture. At home, in the quiet of their kitchen, there were moments when Daniel's silence stretched too long. He would sit at the table, his eyes fixed on nothing, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the wood. Emily would ask about his day, and he'd answer with a half smile, a single sentence, nothing more. Then, as if realizing how it looked, he would lean over, kiss her cheek, and ask about her instead. To others, he was magnetic. To her, sometimes, he was distant, like a stranger she couldn't quite reach. That night, they attended a dinner party at the home of Daniel's colleague. Laughter filled the air, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted garlic and wine. Emily played the role she knew so well, the supportive wife, radiant and gracious. Daniel told a story about their honeymoon in Italy, embellishing details until their audience erupted in amusement. Emily laughed along, though the memory in her head was quieter, more fragile than the version he spun. Then it happened. Just a flicker, but she caught it. Across the table, Daniel's expression shifted when one of the women asked if he was happy in marriage. His jaw tightened before his charming smile returned. Emily felt a cold rush run through her. The question wasn't unusual, but his pause, that fraction of hesitation, lodged itself in her chest. Later, as guests moved to the patio, Emily stood in the kitchen with a glass of water, watching Daniel through the sliding door. He laughed with his colleagues, animated, his hand resting a beat too long on the arm of a woman she didn't know well. Emily sipped slowly, telling herself she was imagining things. Still, the silence between them back home seemed louder now. On the drive back, Daniel kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on her thigh as though nothing were wrong. He hummed softly to the radio, while Emily stared out the window, her reflection trembling against the glass. Something, she realized, had already cracked. The ride home from the dinner party lingered in Emily's mind, long after they pulled into their driveway. Daniel had kissed her forehead before heading straight to his study, leaving her alone in their bedroom. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of his voice through the wall. He was on the phone, speaking in low tones, his words slipping through the cracks like smoke. She strained to catch them, but all she heard was the occasional pause, followed by his sharp whispered laugh. It became a pattern. Nights when Daniel claimed to be working late stretched longer and longer. He would slip out after dinner with vague explanations, returning just before dawn. His shirt wrinkled, his eyes guarded. When Emily asked, he dismissed her gently, as if her worry were a child's foolish fear. "Don't overthink, sweetheart," he'd say, pressing a kiss to her temple. But there was something rehearsed in his tone, a polished rhythm meant to soothe and silence her. One evening, she tried to confront him directly. "Daniel," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "where do you go at night?" He froze mid-step, turning slowly toward her. For a moment, his face was unreadable, his eyes empty of the warmth he showed others. Then, almost too quickly, his smile returned. "Work, Emily. Always work. You know how demanding things are right now." Her heart pounded, but she pushed back. "I called your office yesterday. They said you hadn't been in after hours all week." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's smile vanished. His voice, when it came, was low and edged with steel. "Are you checking up on me?" Emily's breath caught. "I was worried." Worried. He stepped closer, towering over her. Or suspicious. Because those are two very different things. Emily. The air between them thickened, heavy with an unspoken threat. For the first time, Emily saw something behind his eyes that frightened her. Not anger, but calculation. Like he was measuring how far he could push before she broke. She whispered, "I just want the truth." Daniel leaned in, his lips brushing her ear as he spoke. "The truth is, you don't want to imagine life without me. So stop inventing problems that don't exist. Her body trembled as he walked away, leaving her in the living room with her pulse racing. The house, once a place of warmth, now felt colder, its walls closing in. She sank onto the sofa, staring at the glass coffee table. In the reflection, she saw her own face, pale, uncertain, splintering under the weight of doubt. That night, when Daniel slipped out again, Emily sat in the darkened kitchen, phone in hand, considering whether to call Rachel, the one person who might understand. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she listened to the door click shut, her heart shattering at the sound. And in the quiet that followed, she realized the cracks were only beginning to show. The argument still echoed in Emily's mind days later. Daniel had returned to his gentle facade, kissing her cheek in the mornings, sending texts at lunch, pretending nothing had happened. But Emily couldn't shake the shadow of his cold voice, the way he had turned suspicion back on her. It lingered, gnawing at her as she moved through the house. One evening, when the rain tapped steadily against the windows, Daniel announced he was heading out again. "Don't wait up," he said lightly, grabbing his coat. Emily nodded, but her chest tightened as the door clicked behind him. She wandered through the silent house, restless, her mind circling questions with no answers. That's when she noticed the study door. It was always closed, but tonight something felt different. She reached for the knob, locked. The sharp click startled her. Daniel had never locked it before. She pressed her palm against the wood, leaning closer. A faint odor drifted through. The gap where the door met the frame, metallic, acrid like iron and oil. It clung to her throat, making her stomach twist. She tried again, jiggling the knob, whispering under her breath, "What are you hiding?" But the door stayed firm, a silent barrier between them. The sound of tires crunching gravel outside jolted her back. Panic surged through her veins. She darted into the kitchen, pretending to busy herself with dishes as the front door opened. Daniel stepped in, shaking rain from his hair, his smile too easy. "Still awake?" he asked, hanging his coat. Emily forced a laugh. "Couldn't sleep." His eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to her. "You didn't try to go into the study, did you?" The question was casual, almost teasing, but her pulse spiked. "No," she said quickly. Daniel chuckled, crossing the room to kiss her forehead. "Good. It's a mess in there. Papers everywhere. You'd get lost in the chaos." His tone was playful, but something in his gaze lingered, sharp, assessing. Emily nodded, though her thoughts screamed otherwise. She could still taste the metallic scent on her tongue. As they climbed the stairs to bed, Daniel's arm draped around her shoulders. She felt the weight of his presence pressing her down. He whispered goodnight, but Emily lay stiff beneath the covers, staring into the dark. The locked door haunted her. Whatever was hidden inside was more than just papers. And she knew sooner or later she'd have to find out what secrets it guarded. The memory of the locked study door clung to Emily like a second skin. Even as she moved through her daily routines, she couldn't escape the image of that cold brass knob and the faint metallic smell that had seeped through the frame. Sleep offered no relief. Her dreams replayed the moment again and again, the scent turning to blood in her mind. By the end of the week, she couldn't bear the weight of silence any longer. She needed someone outside the house, someone who wouldn't look at her like she was losing her mind. That's when she called Rachel. They met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one lingered too long. Rachel arrived with her usual warmth, hugging Emily tightly, but her smile faded when she saw Emily's pale face. "What's going on?" Rachel asked, concern already knitting her brow. Emily hesitated, stirring her untouched coffee. "It's Daniel. He's different, distant. And there are things I can't explain, the locked study, the late nights, the calls." Her voice cracked and Rachel reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Emily, listen," Rachel said softly, glancing around before lowering her voice. "You know I always liked Daniel, but you don't know everything about him. Back in college, before you met, he had a reputation, not just for charm, but for temper. There was this girl, Anna. They were inseparable until one night she showed a bruised, terrified. She left school soon after. Nobody ever proved anything, but everyone whispered it was Daniel. Emily's breath caught. Why didn't you ever tell me? Rachel's eyes softened with regret. Because I thought he'd changed. You seemed so happy, and he treated you like you were his whole world. I didn't want to ruin that. The cafe's hum faded as Emily's thoughts spiraled. Daniel's cold smile during their argument, the metallic scent behind the locked door, the way he'd asked if she'd tried to enter. Pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve began pressing. Together, Rachel leaned closer. Be careful, Emily. If he's hiding something, you need to protect yourself before it's too late. Emily nodded, though her hands trembled in Rachel's grip. On the drive home, her mind replayed Rachel's words, each one heavier than the last. By the time she pulled into the driveway, the house no longer looked like her home. It looked like a cage, and Daniel held the key. Rachel's warning echoed in Emily's ears long after she left the cafe. She told herself to stay calm, to not leap to conclusions, but unease had already planted roots deep in her chest. That night, she returned home determined to watch Daniel more closely, to look for the cracks she had ignored for years. It didn't take long. At first, it was small things, subtle, almost invisible. She placed her keys on the counter only, to find them later on the windowsill. A glass she swore she had washed reappeared dirty in the sink. Her phone, left charging on the nightstand, ended up tucked inside a drawer she hadn't touched. When she mentioned it, Daniel laughed, his voice warm but sharp underneath. You're overworked. Maybe you need rest. You forget where you put things all the time. But Emily knew she didn't. She began writing little notes to herself, where she placed objects, when she locked doors, what she had cooked. And still, the world shifted around her. Notes vanished. Doors she locked stood ajar, and text messages she thought she'd received were gone from her phone. One evening, she confronted Daniel directly. Did you move my journal? She asked, her voice trembling. He looked up from the couch, brow furrowing in mock confusion. Your journal? I didn't even know you had one. You did, she whispered. I left it by the bed. Now it's gone. Daniel rose slowly, crossing to her. His hand brushed her arm, but his eyes were cold. Emily, listen to yourself. Journals disappearing, keys moving on their own. This isn't me. This is you. Her heart pounded as he leaned closer. If you keep making things up, people will think you're unwell. The word hung in the air like a blade. She wanted to scream, to insist she wasn't imagining it, but his voice was so calm, so certain, that doubt began to seep in. Was she losing her grip? Was stress twisting her mind? Days blurred into nights. Daniel's charm remained intact in public, attentive, devoted, a husband anyone would admire. But behind closed doors, the ground beneath Emily's feet kept shifting. She second-guessed every memory, every sound in the night. The house seemed to conspire with him, a maze of contradictions. Once, she found her phone buzzing with a call from Rachel, only for the screen to go black before she could answer. When she tried to call back, her call log showed nothing. Rachel swore she had rung twice. Emily wept quietly in the bathroom, staring at her reflection, unsure if the cracks she saw were in the mirror or in herself. Daniel's words circled her thoughts until she could barely breathe. Maybe you're unwell. And as she lay awake one night, listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside her, a news report on the radio drifted faintly from the living room. A girl from Daniel's office was missing. Emily's blood turned to ice. The radio's voice had been faint, almost drowned by static, but the words etched themselves into Emily's mind. Local authorities are investigating the disappearance of 26-year-old Claire Jennings, last seen leaving her office late Friday night. Emily sat frozen on the edge of the bed, her breath caught in her throat. Claire Jennings. She knew that name. Images flickered through her memory. A company holiday party 2 years ago. Daniel introducing her to a young woman with auburn hair and a nervous smile. Emily remembered shaking Claire's hand, sensing a flicker of admiration in the girl's gaze toward Daniel. She stared at her sleeping husband, his body relaxed, his breathing steady, as though nothing in the world could trouble him. But the words on the radio pulsed like a heartbeat inside her skull. The next morning, the news report played again on television. Claire's photo filled the screen. Bright eyes, dimpled cheeks, a warmth that seemed to radiate through the image. Emily's stomach churned. She pictured Daniel's late-night calls, his unexplained absences, the locked study with its metallic scent. The puzzle pieces she had been too afraid to arrange began aligning themselves with brutal clarity. She whispered to herself, "No, it can't be." Daniel appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie. "What can't be?" Emily flinched, scrambling to compose herself. "Nothing, just the news." He followed her gaze to the television. For the briefest moment, his expression faltered, his jaw tightening, before the charming mask slid back into place. "Terrible, isn't it? Poor girl. I think she worked in accounting." Emily searched his face for answers, but his eyes were unreadable. That day, she couldn't focus on anything. Every creak of the house set her on edge. She replayed Rachel's warning about Daniel's past, the bruised girl who vanished from college, and shivered at the parallel. Could history be repeating itself? That evening, Daniel came home later than usual, his shirt collar rumpled, his smile too deliberate. He poured himself a drink and asked about her day, as though everything were normal. Emily forced a response, but inside her mind was screaming. When he stepped out to take yet another call, Emily crept toward the study door. Still locked, still silent. Her hand hovered over the knob, trembling. Behind it, she felt not just secrets, but answers she wasn't ready to face. She pressed her ear against the wood, straining for the faintest sound. All she heard was the echo of her own heartbeat, and in that silence she realized the missing girl might not be the only one in danger. Sleep became impossible after the report about Claire Jennings. Every time Emily closed her eyes, she saw the girl's face on the television, smiling brightly, unaware of the darkness that would swallow her. And every time she looked at Daniel, she saw the possibility of that darkness reflected in his calm, calculating gaze. So one evening, when Daniel announced he had to work late, Emily made her decision. As his car disappeared down the street, she hurried to the study door. Her hands trembled as she pulled the ring of spare keys from the kitchen drawer. For weeks she had been too afraid to try, but tonight the fear of not knowing outweighed the fear of discovery. The third key slid into the lock and turned with a soft click. Emily pushed the door open. The metallic smell hit her immediately, sharp and coppery mixed with stale paper. The room was dim, curtains drawn, the desk cluttered with files and folders stacked in chaotic towers. She stepped inside, her breath shallow, scanning for whatever Daniel guarded so carefully. That's when she saw it. A black leather journal, its spine cracked, resting on the center of the desk like a relic. Her hands shook as she opened it. The first pages looked harmless enough, neat handwriting, lists of appointments, fragments of thoughts. But as she turned the pages, her stomach dropped. The writing grew darker, sentences sharp and jagged, words repeating like mantras: control, betrayal, punishment, silence. Alongside the entries were crude sketches, faceless women drawn in ink, their bodies contorted, sometimes crossed out in furious strokes of black. One page stopped her cold. A sketch of a young woman with auburn hair, her features eerily resembling Claire Jennings. Next to it, Daniel had scrawled, "Weakness invites consequence." Emily's vision blurred. Her hands clutched the desk to steady herself. She flipped further, only to find coded notes, strange symbols paired with dates. One date matched the night Daniel had returned home at dawn. Another matched the day Claire had vanished. A sob caught in her throat, but she forced it down, terrified of making a sound. Closing the journal, she slipped it back exactly where she found it. Her heart hammered as she backed out of the study, locking the door behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, shaking violently, the weight of what she had seen crushing her. Daniel wasn't just secretive. He wasn't just distant. He was dangerous. Headlights swept across the window, his car returning. Emily scrambled, shoving the keys back into the drawer, composing herself just as the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside, smiling. "Miss me?" Emily forced a laugh, though her body screamed to run. Because now she knew the truth. Daniel's secrets weren't just personal, they were lethal. The morning after she discovered the journal, Emily woke to the sound of the doorbell. Her heart jolted as she padded down the stairs, still shaken from the night before. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she saw the outline of a tall man in a dark coat. Daniel appeared behind her, tie half knotted, expression carefully neutral. "I'll get it," he said. When the door swung open, a man introduced himself with a badge. "Detective Harris, may I have a moment?" His voice was polite but firm, the kind that left no room for refusal. Daniel smiled easily. "Of course, come in." Emily lingered at the bottom of the stairs as the detective stepped inside. Harris's gaze flicked toward her briefly, sharp and assessing, before settling on Daniel. "I'm following up on the disappearance of Claire Jennings," Harris said. "We've been speaking with her colleagues. Your name came up." Emily's breath caught. Daniel didn't falter. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Claire? Yes, she worked in our office. Sweet girl, but I hardly knew her. I can't imagine why my name would come up." The lie slid off his tongue like silk. Harris didn't move, didn't blink. "When was the last time you saw her?" Daniel tilted his head as if considering. "At a staff meeting, maybe 2 weeks ago. Nothing since then." Emily wanted to scream, to tell Harris about the journal, the late nights, the metallic smell behind the locked door, but her throat locked tight. She watched Daniel, his posture relaxed, his voice steady, as though he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. After a few more questions, Harris handed Daniel his card. "If you remember anything, give me a call." His eyes lingered on Emily for a heartbeat too long, as though he sensed her silence. Then he left. The moment the door shut, Daniel's smile evaporated. He turned to Emily, his eyes dark and cutting. "You didn't say anything, did you?" Emily shook her head, pulse racing. "Good," he said, stepping closer until she could feel his breath. "Don't ever cross me, Emily. Not with the police. Not with anyone." His words were soft, but the threat beneath them coiled like a knife, pressed against her skin. That night, Emily lay awake, the detective's card burning in her memory. Harris had seen something. Maybe he was her only chance. The detective's visit left an aftershock in the house. Emily moved carefully, her every step shadowed by Daniel's watchful eyes. He carried himself with a sharper edge now, his charm polished thinner, his temper simmering just beneath the surface. She could feel the tension coiling tighter each day, like a rope around her throat. She needed proof, something undeniable, something Harris couldn't ignore. That chance came one night during yet another argument. Daniel had come home late, smelling faintly of whiskey and something metallic. Emily couldn't hold her silence any longer. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice trembling but louder than she intended. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Work, always work. Why do you ask the same questions over and over?" Emily clenched her fists. "Because you're lying to me. I know it, Daniel, I see it in your face." He laughed low and bitter. "You think you know me, Emily. You don't know anything. You never have." Her heart hammered, but she kept her expression steady. What he didn't know was that her phone, hidden beneath a folded blanket on the armchair, was recording every word. "You disappear for hours," she pressed, her voice breaking. "You lock doors in our own home. And Claire Jennings—" "Stop!" he snapped, stepping closer, his face inches from hers. "Don't say her name." "Why not?" Emily's voice shook, but she pushed forward. "Because you were with her the night she went missing." His hand slammed against the wall beside her head, making her flinch. His voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Careful, Emily. People vanish when they can't keep their mouths shut." The words hung in the air like poison. Emily's breath stuttered, tears pricking her eyes. She had it, his threat, his rage, his slip of the mask. Proof. Hours later, when Daniel finally stormed upstairs, Emily stayed behind in the darkened living room. She retrieved the phone, clutching it with trembling hands. Relief coursed through her. Tomorrow she would go to the police. She would give Harris this recording and finally someone would believe her. But as she turned to head upstairs, the world froze. Daniel stood at the top of the staircase, his silhouette stark against the dim hall light. His voice was quiet, almost amused. Looking for something? Emily's blood ran cold. She tried to hide the phone behind her back, but his eyes were already on it. He descended slowly, each step deliberate, like a predator closing in on prey. "You really thought you could trick me," he said, his tone soft, deadly. "Record me in my own house." Emily's chest tightened, her resolve warring with terror. She backed toward the kitchen, clutching the phone as though it were a lifeline. Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes blazed. "Now, Emily, you've left me no choice." Emily's back pressed against the cold wall of the kitchen as Daniel advanced, each step deliberate, his smile carved from cruelty. The phone trembled in her grip, the recording still glowing faintly on the screen. "Hand it over," he said, softly, stretching out his palm. "Let's not make this uglier than it has to be." Her voice cracked. "Stay away from me." Daniel's laugh was low, humorless. "Emily, you're not built for this fight. You never were." In a flash, he lunged. She darted sideways, the phone slipping from her hand and skittering across the floor. He grabbed her arm, twisting it until she gasped in pain. "You think you can destroy me with a toy?" he hissed. Summoning every ounce of strength, Emily shoved him back, sending both of them crashing into the hallway. The struggle tumbled them toward the locked study. Daniel slammed her against the door, fumbling in his pocket for the keys. The smell of iron and oil wafted out as he forced it open, dragging her inside. The room closed around her like a tomb. Papers flew as she clawed at the desk for anything to defend herself. Her hand landed on a heavy glass paperweight. She swung wildly, striking his shoulder. He roared, shoving her to the floor. "Ungrateful," he spat, towering over her. "I give you everything, and you choose betrayal?" His hand wrapped around her throat. Spots danced before her eyes. Desperation flared, and her fingers scrambled against the floor until they found the jagged edge of a broken picture frame. She drove it upward, the shard slicing across his forearm. Daniel screamed, stumbling back. Blood splattered the hardwood. Dark and spreading fast. Gasping for breath, Emily crawled to the corner, clutching the shard like a lifeline. Daniel staggered, eyes wide with disbelief at the crimson pouring from his arm. His expression twisted, not in pain but in rage. "You'll pay for this," he rasped. He lunged again, but his footing slipped on the slick floor. The crash was deafening, his body collapsing against the desk, sending books and glass shattering to the ground. Emily pressed herself against the wall, trembling. Her hand found the phone where it had fallen. With blood-streaked fingers, she dialed. What's your emergency?" Her voice broke into sobs. "Please. Help. My husband, there's blood." She couldn't finish. She stared at the floor where the dark pool widened, swallowing the light. For the first time, the house was silent. The weeks that followed blurred into interviews, police reports, and endless questions. Emily barely remembered the ambulance ride, or the moment officers pulled Daniel, bloodied but alive, from the study floor. What she did remember was his stare as they carried him out, calm, defiant, as though the entire world was a stage and he still controlled the script. By the time the trial began, the town was already divided. Headlines splashed across newspapers. "Devoted husband or master manipulator." Strangers debated her sanity in grocery store aisles, whispering if she had imagined the whole thing. Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat in a crisp suit, polished as ever, his arm bandaged but his charm undiminished. He leaned toward his lawyer often, whispering with the same easy smile he once wore at dinner parties. Emily sat across from him, hands folded tightly, a wall of glass between them but no protection from his gaze. The prosecution painted him as a predator, a man who thrived on control and fear. They displayed the journal, its pages of disturbing sketches and coded notes. They called witnesses from the office who testified to his closeness with Claire Jennings, the missing girl. And when Detective Harris took the stand, He described the inconsistencies in Daniel's story with clinical precision, but the defense was relentless. They called Emily an unstable wife, hinting at her supposed paranoia, suggesting the journal was nothing more than dark fiction, stress scribbles blown out of proportion. They implied she had staged parts of the confrontation herself, desperate for attention. Finally, the day came for Emily's testimony. Her legs trembled as she walked to the stand, the room buzzing with anticipation. She swore the oath, sat down, and for a moment silence pressed heavy against her chest. The prosecutor asked gently, "Emily, can you tell us what happened that night?" Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. She told them about the locked door, the metallic smell, the journal filled with women's faces. She described the argument, Daniel's threats, the recording she'd captured before he discovered it. She recounted every detail of the struggle in the study, the paperweight, the glass shard, the blood spreading across the floor. Her voice shook, but she did not break. When the defense cross-examined, Daniel's lawyer tried to dismantle her piece by piece. "Mrs. Collins, isn't it true you had been under severe emotional stress, that you doubted your own memory, even wrote notes to yourself because you were confused?" Emily met his eyes, then glanced at Daniel, whose smile was still fixed in place, and for the first time she didn't feel small. "I doubted myself because he made me doubt," she said firmly. "But I know the truth now. I lived it." The courtroom fell silent. As she stepped down from the stand, she could feel Daniel's stare searing into her back, a silent promise that the battle between them wasn't over. The trial dragged on for weeks, but the verdict came down to more than Emily's words. The jury leaned forward as the prosecutor announced new evidence, items recovered from a storage unit registered under Daniel's name. Inside were boxes filled with women's belongings, jewelry, scarves, notebooks, all cataloged with the same neat handwriting found in his journal. Among them was a necklace confirmed by Claire Jennings's sister, the one Claire never took off. Another box contained an ID card from a woman who had vanished 3 years earlier, a case that had long gone cold. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily sat rigid, her nails digging into her palms, fighting the urge to scream. It wasn't just Claire. It wasn't just suspicion. It was a pattern. Daniel's mask cracked for the first time. His smile faltered. His jaw tightened. But even then he tried to spin it, telling his lawyer the items were keepsakes, tokens left behind by friends. But the jury saw what Emily had seen all along, the darkness beneath his charm. When the guilty verdict was finally read, Emily felt no triumph, only emptiness. She had lost years to a marriage that was nothing more than a prison built from lies. Afterward, as the courtroom cleared, Detective Harris approached her quietly. "You saved lives, Emily. If you hadn't come forward, he would have gone on." His words were steady, but his eyes carried the weight of truth. There were more victims they might never find. That night, Emily returned to the house alone. The rooms felt hollow, stripped of their illusions. She walked into the study, now sealed with police tape, and stared at the faint stains still etched into the hardwood floor. Her reflection wavered in the glass of the broken frame, and for the first time she allowed herself to cry. She thought of the journal, of the countless nights Daniel had sat behind that locked door, writing in neat, obsessive lines while she slept just feet away. Their marriage hadn't been love. It had been a stage, carefully lit, every gesture rehearsed, every word calculated. She had been cast as the perfect wife, blind to the truth, until it nearly consumed her. In the quiet she whispered, "I didn't lose you, Daniel. I lost the illusion of you." And with that, she turned off the light, stepping into a future haunted by betrayal, but no longer controlled by it. The case would live on in headlines whispered about in disbelief. "This case is so chilling, you won't believe it's real,"